Are you thinking about starting a branded podcast but have no idea where to start and don't really understand what the benefits are? Well, you, my friend, have come to the right place. Whether you're curious about what a podcast is, wondering whether it's worth it, or just need some inspiration, we have got you covered. From stats and strategies to tips and real life examples, we'll walk you through everything you need to know to start and stick with a branded podcast that connects with your audience. Starting off with the most obvious question, what is a branded podcast? A branded podcast is published by brands and organizations to highlight their brand, their values, and more importantly, their expertise. They're also a great way to establish and build connections with both new and current customers. Now then, the focus shouldn't be on selling products and services. If your podcast is pretty much a sales pitch, no one is going to want to listen. I mean, would you? The focus should be on creating content that people want to binge. Of course, episodes need to be relevant to your business. So find topics and themes that you can cover that really showcases your experience and expertise. You can also find themes that align with your values and ethics, which you can then talk about in a very open, relatable, and transparent way. Doing this will make sure that the content that you create for your podcast is always going to resonate with the intended audience. Of course, you can and should sell products and services as part of your podcast, but that shouldn't be the main focus. That should be the byproduct of having a podcast. So I teased that I'm going to share some stats and let's get cracking, shall we? Now, something that I hear a lot is, isn't everyone starting a podcast nowadays? Now, I understand that it may seem that way. It may seem that everyone is starting a podcast. However, I have some interesting data that would actually argue the contrary. In 2020 and 2021, there was a boom in people starting podcasts. More than 1 million, that is 1 million people started a podcast in 2020. And then if we look at 2021, that figure was around 740,000. So if we look at the dates before and after, so in 2019, this number was 336,000, and in 2022, the number was 245,000. So to compare those dates, what happened in 2020/2021? Why was everyone starting a podcast? And that is because COVID happened. And we all had a lot more time on our hands, didn't we? With all the furloughs and the lockdowns, we all had to find alternative ways that we could entertain ourselves. Some of us joined online quizzes. I know I did my fair few, whilst others decided to launch their own podcast. So if we look at 2022 and why that number dramatically decreased, that is because life returned back to normal. People had less time, so they stopped launching and carrying on with their podcasts. I was one of those people. So during COVID, I set up The Lipsticks, which was a podcast that explored LGBTQ plus topics and themes. But me and my co-host, when life returned back to normal, couldn't find time to fit it into our schedule. I mean, we still talk to this day, we should really bring the lipsticks back. And hey, you never know. Let's also talk about pod fade. I bet you're thinking, pod fade? What are you talking about, Sarah? Pod fade, is when a podcast gradually or suddenly stops publishing new episodes. They just stop. So with pod fade, why does it happen? Now, we all start new projects, and podcasts are no different. We all start these things with good intentions, but life happens, doesn't it? We can't quite commit to what we want to, or things get in the way. So your podcast slowly fades into the podcasting ether. Time for some more lovely stats that argue the contrary on isn't everyone starting a podcast? Are you ready? Did you know 90% of podcasters don't make it past 3 episodes? 90%. Out of the top 10% of the most popular podcasts, 90% won't make it past episode 20. And the last stat that will blow your mind is you are in the top 1% of podcasts if you reach 21 episodes. So not everyone is starting a podcast. And even those that are starting a podcast, we're not sticking around, are we? So what was interesting is when I was doing my research into this, a lot of podcasts have sadly succumbed to the dreaded pod fade. Annoyingly, when I was doing research and I was looking at the top branded podcasts, top podcasts about this particular topic, I tended to land on listicles, so articles that had X of the best, and they would list their favourite and say why. Now, what was really interesting is a lot of these articles, when I clicked the link to check out the podcast, some podcasts had stopped publishing new episodes, and some it was like a matter of months, but some we're talking years. And it's not just articles that we're talking about. So whenever we do a search, Google will pull up sort of interesting things to show on that page. Now, whenever there was a podcast carousel or a featured snippet, I was seeing the same thing. So Google was suggesting these podcasts, and when I went onto them, they had succumbed to this dreaded pod fade. Okay, time to get to the juicy part. I'm going to share with you 8 benefits of having a branded podcast. So benefit number 1 is increase brand awareness. Ask any business about what their goals are, and majority would say that one of their goals would be to increase brand awareness. They want more people knowing about them. There are more than 584 million podcast listeners worldwide. Just let that number sink in. That's a lot of people and potential for your business. Having a podcast is a great way to get your brand in front of these listeners, because then you can convert them to customers further down the line. Benefit number 2. It gives you the opportunity to really build deep connections with your audience. So if I think about the podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis, I feel like I have this connection with the hosts. I feel like I sort of know them. Over the episodes that I've listened to, I've got to know them on a more personal level. I can relate to what they do, say, and feel on the podcast. Some podcasters have insider banter, so jokes that only regular listeners will understand. I have a much deeper connection via listening to episodes than I ever would on social media. You can do the same with your branded podcast. Listeners will get to know who is behind the brand, helping them to feel more of a connection. Reason number 3, you can position yourself as a thought leader. You can also use the podcast to share your expertise, experience, and knowledge on certain topics and trends in your industry, and share insights and give your own opinion. You can also use the podcast to interview well-known and well-respected people within your industry. With all this, you can position yourself as a trusted and go-to resource and authority. People will know to come to you whenever they're stuck on something, want advice, need to talk about something, and they'll also recommend you to others. We're at that halfway point. Reason number 4, you can relate better to your audience. So use episodes to give your opinion and viewpoint on certain topics that you know your audience genuinely cares about. Use your episodes to share your viewpoint on certain topics that you know your audience cares about and talks about regularly. This is an easy way to foster a better relationship with current and potential customers. If they know what you stand for and they agree and they want to support, they will know and trust you more as a brand. Benefit number 5 is that you can more easily differentiate yourself against your competition. Now, you may already have this covered. You know your USP and are clear on how you are different and better than your competitors. Great. If you have that knowledge, use the podcast to spread that message. If you're struggling, use the podcast, the actual branded podcast, as a way to be different. This is easy if your competitors don't have a podcast, or they have a podcast, but they haven't published an episode in a while. So, going back to the old pod fade, you can always find a gap in the market. So even if your competitors or people that do the same thing as you have a podcast, you can always find a gap. You can always find a niche. What is missing that you know your audience would love? What would you love? Number 6, build trust and loyalty. Branded podcasts are a great way to establish, build, and keep trust and loyalty with your audience. How? How, I hear you asking me? By sharing inspiring stories and case studies. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Provide interesting news and insights. Be entertaining. The list goes on and on. Reason number 7, nearly getting to our last one, but the penultimate reason is measurable engagement. Now, another common goal for businesses, along with that brand awareness, is to improve engagement. They want customers or potential customers or their audience to engage with the brand. With branded podcasts, you have many ways to track this. You have many ways that you can track and measure your engagement. So what is your podcast doing for you and your audience? Things to ask yourself are people following the podcast? Are they following so they're getting notified when new episodes are live? Are they also rating and reviewing? This is a great way to show the impact. See what people are saying about how your podcast has helped them and in what way. Are people reaching out on social media to discuss the podcast or the topics or something that you've spoke about in a recent episode? Are people following the links in the show notes? So are you directing people to interesting data, resources, things about the business in your show notes? Are people listening to more than one episode? So are they coming back and listening to more than one episode? They're returning listeners. See, I told you all these questions you can track and ask about your podcast. Okay, last benefit. It is a cost-effective way to promote your company. So I'm very aware that when starting a podcast, there will be some initial investment costs, but these will mostly be one-off costs, and you can repurpose your equipment for other projects. Of course, there's the time and resource that goes into producing and publishing podcasts and episodes, but that's the same with any marketing and promotional channel. If you compare promoting products and services on a podcast, it is much more cost effective when comparing to the likes of paid media. So going back to my earlier point, the main purpose of your podcast is to entertain, inform, inspire, but you should definitely take the opportunities when they arise to talk about your products and services. Mention them naturally during episodes, or record short ads that you can play during your episodes. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. We have an awesome article on the LikeMind Media website that talks about ways that you can convert your podcast listeners into paying customers. Moving on to examples of branded podcasts. So I've busted those myths about podcasts and listed all the benefits of why you should start one. And hopefully you're eager to do this now. But I bet the next question is, please, Sarah, give us some examples of branded podcasts. And your wish is my command. So I have 3 branded podcast examples to share. The first is the Penguin Podcast. The Penguin Podcast has recently launched a new podcast series called Ask Penguin. Each episode, they interview book authors and people that work at Penguin. Do you need to find your next page turner? Are you curious about what a day in the life of an editor looks like? Or perhaps why a small, aquatic, flightless bird became the iconic emblem that adorns all Penguin books. Example number 2 is Dear Headspace. Headspace have a number of different podcasts. They've really caught on to the podcasting bug. And for their podcast, they use the name Headspace Studio. Their most recent podcast is called Dear Headspace, which is like having a meditation teacher on speed dial in your pocket. In each episode, trusted experts will come on and talk about the world of meditating. My last example is Shopify Masters. Do you want to start a business but don't know where to get started? Shopify sits down with entrepreneurs and e-commerce experts to share their experiences of running a successful online business. So those are a few examples, and I really urge you to go and check them out. Go and check out others to start getting some inspiration flowing. Just want to quickly squeeze in tips of how to make sure your branded podcast is a success. Tip number 1, always focus on the content and sales. Prioritize value and engaging content, as sales will then follow naturally. Reason number 2, be consistent and try to avoid that pod fade. Always plan ahead, batch record, build and stick to a content calendar, and commit to a publishing episode that is realistic for you. Tip number 3, stay aligned with your brand. This is so important. When planning episodes, always think about your brand's voice, values, and expertise. What do you want to be known for? Choose topics that make sense, that you know your audience will care about, and have a plan to promote your podcast episodes. Utilize all the other channels that you have access to. Repurpose your podcast episodes for the intended platform and get shouting about your amazing podcast. Give all the reasons why people need to listen. These are the basics when starting a branded podcast. These are the fundamentals. Of course, this is an area that LikeMind Media can help with. So please do get in touch. Just want to finish on talking about JourneyWeb quickly. So JourneyWeb is LikeMind Media's bespoke service, which is all about mapping the customer's journey for your brand, mapping out all the touch points and creating content that meets them. It might just be that a branded podcast is just what your audience is searching for. So let's definitely discuss that. On the screen is a link to find out more about JourneyWeb. And we'll also pop on the screen a link to our short 5-minute quiz where you can find out how well you understand your customer journey.